the smart partnership movement with the Commonwealth Partnership for Technology Management as a formal organization to support the CPTM at large. Over the years, the smart partners have been articulating a language to suit and adapt the occasions of any kind. And this is yet a first type of occasion when an innovation, I suppose, when we were struggling, a number of smart partners from all over the Commonwealth, about 2 weeks ago, with the idea of how can we, besides our think tanking and dialogues and everything else that we do at the country level, in the institute, how can we evolve a different dynamics and interactions which is fit for this, sorry for mentioning the word solo, digital landscape. The digital landscape has its own language, and is quite right in the morning to say it really makes some people, put them completely out of equation. It's a language, actually, to start with. Now, the idea of spotting signals of tomorrow, not in the future, tomorrow, that means today, and that's tomorrow, is so essential. We've been in this business for about 30 years, 22 as we will see at the annual general meeting which will follow this panel as CPTM. And we always kind of, the smart partnership movement, because it's rooted in real time and in the, not the grassroots, this is a kind of jargon which is being used without having a meaning, but is really rooted real time in real people. People who have got particular functions which attract other people with similar functions, and as Honorable Hausiku was mentioning all the time, they are sharing. There's a lot of sharing, but it can only be a smart partnership type of sharing. Intellectual equity, if it's action-based, if it resonates with something that I do. So in that sense, we say is rooted in real time, our type of frameworks. And now, the word panel, the language that is being used, is not the right thing for inclusivity. It means some people are included in the panel, others are excluded. And it means that is a one-off. Now, the intention in the smart partnership movement is that today the smart partners are initiating an ongoing, a rolling process through which one spots signals and articulates them, and others shares them, of tomorrow, but in the context of this distributed growth, distributed wealth type of issues that have been discussed in a think tanking mode. So, there is an interest in all the movement of this issue, and there will be a number of rolling smart partners panels which will obviously focus on how to get there, how to stimulate adaptive networks, because we are talking about networks of individuals, but who practice smart partnership, otherwise they wouldn't trust each other about one says to the other. So to start today, we thought that first of all, we will have the courage to live broadcast the experiment, because so many people wanted to be on to listen to this kind of engagement and to be part of it. And a few of the smart partners are already signaled already that they spotted some kind of issues that signals for tomorrow. And you see, the signals for tomorrow can only be spotted if one is aware about the signals of a global context, Commonwealth context, business context, technology context, and so on and so on. So we had in the Smart Partnership Movement a number of individuals who happen to be here, but that doesn't mean not everyone is part of the panel. But these are those who are going to initiate the various signals. And they will have, what did we say? About, there are so many signals actually, but they will have about, each of you, about what? 3 minutes? Less? 5 minutes? And but because the signals are somehow connected to one another, but still requires an immediate feedback to the signal, then you have 3 minutes. And that is where Omar will be very strict, and Solo will watch Omar to see if he is doing that, of a reaction from each and every, rather than at the end. There are signals which are diverse. They all go the same way, maybe, but there will be a need for a feedback from each and every as soon as you finished. And we will have up to about 1:45, 2:45. But what we'd like to say is, first of all, Honorable Hausiku, thank you very much for enlisting again all the SWAPO school and making available in Windhoek, as we speak, the SWAPO group, which mobilized a number of smart partners in Windhoek, as we speak, who are watching live broadcasted, these live broadcasts. And people can send email, text, but we are not having teleconference. We are doing a live broadcast. This will continue immediately after AGM with another signal, and we'll finish off tomorrow, Tuesday, at about 11 for about 3/4 of an hour. So, Omar, the ball is in your court now.
I'm supposed to convene this joint rolling panel, but I thought let me just share a few words, because the title says "Spotting Signals for Tomorrow," and since there are new people now, I will repeat what I said at the beginning as a means of spotting signals for tomorrow. I mentioned earlier this morning that I attended a lecture, and this is what I heard from that lecture. Now, in the 21st century, knowledge and information is Googled. Transportation or taxis is Ubered. Communication is WhatsApp, Twitter, or Messenger. Memories are Instagram. Life and relationship are Facebooked. And because the speaker was from India, work is Bangalore, in other words, outsourced. And employees are free agents. Those are, for me, signals for tomorrow. So these are new things which are encouraged or enabled by this new trend of digital landscapes. So that's by way of an introduction, but this will be picked up by our panelists. I will call them the first tier panel, which is seated at that table over there. And they are made up of Amitav Banerjee, Oliver Oram, Yes, Oliver. Ellen Bryden, Donald O'Neill, Peter Swettenham, Patsy Robertson, and Barry Ford. So we will begin with Amitabh.
Why Amitabh?
Well, I have his name. You put his name down here. So
Amitabh is one, so why Amitabh? Well, because of the global context, you are part of a global leadership foundation.
Can I be heard? Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you, Mihaela, for asking me. I think I'm probably a bit more of a misfit when you're talking about WhatsApp and Facebook and Instagram, and because I'm a bit more of a dinosaur in the midst of those who deal with technology and manage technology. But I'm a political animal. I grew up as a diplomat, and I spent 25 years at the Commonwealth Secretariat. I now work for a group of retired leaders who are quietly available to advise any of today's leaders who ask for advice on a discreet and confidential basis. And as a diplomat and as an international civil servant, I tend to look at more of the strategic and macro changes in the global landscape. Mihaela, this said there is 6 minutes to each panelist, but I think you announced that there's only 3, or maybe as a compromise 5.
Three probably
okay.
as a feedback.
So from a political point of view, I think those of us whose memories are not very short remember that in the early 90s, when the Berlin Wall fell and apartheid ended in South Africa, the world was transformed, and everybody had to recalibrate their policies and their strategies. Democracy spread like an inexorable tide. The USSR collapsed, the map of Eastern Europe changed. Across Africa, across Latin America, across Asia, you couldn't anymore have the luxury of opting for one or other godfather and play people against each other. Russia joined the G7, which became the G8, and worked with the West on foreign policy challenges. On the economic side, the big buzzword became globalization. Today we have had a complete turnaround. Globalization is seen by some of its strongest advocates earlier as a menace and a curse. Trade barriers are coming back up. Bilateralism and plurilateralism are tending to replace multilateralism. Populism is evident in countries that were bastions of democracy. The world's most powerful democracy in the United States, and the world's largest democracy, my own country, India, are having slogans like America First or Make in India. The decision by the British people in June of 2016 to leave the European Union drove a dagger through what is arguably the greatest and most successful experiment in regional integration, causing major reverberations in Britain and Europe, with no clarity yet on how either will withstand a body blow. The Chinese giant is not only well and truly awake, but striding across the globe, leaving its imprint far and wide. The Belt and Road Initiative seems an exercise not only in flexing economic muscle, but also capitalizing on vacuums left by others. Donald Trump would not have liked the cover of The Economist magazine 2 weeks ago, which had a portrait of Xi Jinping, and the caption said, "The world's most powerful man." Politically, right-wing politics has made aggressive advances through democratic means, and the phenomenon of mass migration has driven voters towards politicians who advocate the building of walls. There are frightening signs of a new Cold War. Who would have thought that NATO would reinvent itself and give itself additional capacity? On the flip side, Russia and its allies have recently held on the borders of the European Union the biggest ever military exercise in a long time, called Zapad. And just when we all thought the specter of a nuclear holocaust has all but disappeared, we see real danger of nuclear proliferation turning into nuclear conflagration. In the Middle East, nobody just talks of the Palestinian issue anymore. That seems to have got relegated to the back burner. It's Syria, it's Iraq, it's Libya, it's Shia versus Sunni, and the competing ambitions of Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Turkey. The actions taken recently to reverse some of the most impressive achievements of international diplomacy, the climate change agreement in Paris, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Iran nuclear deal, the US rapprochement with Cuba, I believe are distressing. And the net impact of all this is that democracy is reversing itself in many places. Governments are choosing again to join spheres of influence, with China's very much in the ascendancy. Many leaders no longer care for term limits. Powerful executives are tipping the balance in their favor vis-à-vis the other branches of government, the judiciary, the legislature. And in many places, human rights and the rule of law are taking a knock. Now, there are of course good stories in the middle of all of this, of democracy being embedded, of the Gambia, of Ghana, of peaceful transitions of power, of economic progress, but these tend to get obscured by the stories of conflict and of retrogression. And in all this, small countries tend to suffer more than others, no longer feeling part of the international mainstream and suffering a sense of marginalization. So the signals I'm spotting, ladies and gentlemen, are not encouraging ones, I fear. I see multilateralism under threat. I see the rise of island mentalities. I see xenophobic politics. I see the regression of democracy and possible return of despotism in some places. And I see a world dominated by three powerful players, America, China, and Russia, with less powerful countries playing off one against the others. I see a rising trend in conflict. I see extremism and terrorism, and I see climate change taking a heavier and heavier toll. But let me not end on a depressing note. Internationally, multilateralism will and must prevail, and organizations like the United Nations, the Commonwealth, and the Francophonie have an important role to play. Likewise, democracy cannot really be reversed, because the media is much freer the world over, civil society is much more powerful the world over, people have become much more assertive about their rights. So there's definitely cause for hope. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I have one question.
Okay.
Very quick.
You want to respond?
Not response.
You want
quick
to
question.
ask questions? Okay.
You see, maybe you could continue if you had more minutes this time. This naked diplomacy, as we call it this morning, based very much on digital landscape and so on, contradicts the typical diplomacy, the chessboard diplomacy, and is more and more what is emerging is a web type of diplomacy. Now, yeah, everybody is quite kind of amazed about the courage that Trump, without realizing what he does. But in fact, what he does is to stimulate and to attract the attention to everybody that the chessboard diplomacy among the big powers is not on anymore. There is a web type of network diplomacy which is softer, where smart partnership and various other things might be handy. But do you think the leaders could understand this?
Yeah, I think
because they still refer to chessboard type anyway.
I'm sorry I missed this morning's discussion, and I will again repeat the health warning that I'm not an expert on the digital
No, but
age. But you're quite right. I think certainly within countries, national politics has become transformed. I don't think today's leaders can win elections without using the digital media available to them. I think whether you take anybody in Asia, in my own Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, but in Africa, in Latin America, without Facebook, without Instagram, without WhatsApp, and without the ability to mobilize your supporters, and without the ability to counter your opponents using such media, I do not think political leaders can assume office anymore. And then it is, of course, a continuing instrument of governance that you need to use. As far as international diplomacy is concerned, I think certainly the bigger powers use it a lot and use it more effectively. But I would be one of those traditionalists who say that the place for the old style diplomacy is very much there. And I do not think that digital diplomacy will take over from that old style chessboard diplomacy, as you call it, overnight.
Okay.
One more quick response from anybody?
We have another 2 minutes. Very good.
No?
Now, John, you're a diplomat. Good, John, quick. Can you pick up the?
Okay, Barry.
And Julia.
Just a quick comment. Vlad
What are you doing?
has referred to island mentality. And I would like to quickly say that as an islander, we would like to make a statement very clear that whilst there is this reference to island mentality, which is very much real, we do make a very big effort for us to have a mindset which is not based on vulnerability. Because while small states, small island states, or even small states, not just island states, have a lot of inherent problems of vulnerability, which are very much linked to their size, to the material conditions of their geography, the economic base, the size of their population, which they cannot do much to change, really. We strive increasingly to develop strength in our numbers. We've built alliances throughout the world. We have this alliance of small island states, which is based in New York. We build blocks within the ACP, within the Commonwealth, within other organizations within Africa itself, in order for us to develop the strength in numbers and to influence multilateralism, to have increasingly a multilateralism which is there to defend the vulnerable of the world, the weak, or those who are considered weak in the world, because it is only an international set of rules which are based on equity, which will really protect the small states or the small island developing states. So we are very much aware of that we need not to fall into the trap of vulnerability. So I just wanted to make a quick reference to this. Thank you.
6 minutes now, it's more than. Okay, if you want to be flexible, I'm okay too. But I thought you want to limit that. Yes, please, sir.
Julius Peter Moto, High Commissioner of Uganda. I have a question for you, sir. How do you think the web technology is going to impact on the traditional diplomacy? Because you mentioned it in your presentation.
I think that I would firstly repeat that it's probably not going to find it easy to replace completely the traditional tenets of diplomacy. But some of the larger foreign offices, for example, are already using digital communications not just to deal with their own diplomats posted abroad, but to deal with partner countries. And sometimes in international organizations now you have meetings that are very much based on web technology and not physical meetings. They are virtual meetings that enable people sitting in any part of the world to discuss issues that concern them all. May I just quickly make a comment? Firstly, island mentality was never meant to be a pejorative thing. It's just one of these descriptions that have entered the English language. But I want to make a plug here for one particular phenomenon, for example, that I have come across and I've been studying of late, that is hitting small countries in particular. And small island countries in the Caribbean are particularly badly affected. Patsy would know. It is called de-risking. And it comes from the phenomenon of money laundering and terrorist financing. And because the regulators, the Financial Action Task Force and the Financial Stability Board, and the G20 and the IMF and the World Bank have put such heavy penalties on international banks who do business with people who are seen as suspect, that these banks have just simply decided to cut off links with these economies. They say it is just not worth our while incurring massive fines dealing with a small economy that represents a very tiny fraction of our balance sheet. And all these economies are saying, look, we've done everything possible, we've pulled up our socks, we comply with the international standards, but we can't have the HSBCs and the Barclays and the Bank of America doing business with us because we are seen as too risky from their point of view. This is one particular concrete example where small countries are paying the price for today's global situation. Thank you.
Anita forgot to mention that nobody can win a leadership contest now without promoting fake news. Okay, now can we move on to Oliver, please?
My name's Oliver, so I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Chainvine. I'm a technologist. I think it's really interesting actually to listen to the fears you talked about, because my son has feared these fears for many years, and his fears have changed lately. He's actually beginning to say to me, Dad, you know, what you're doing, am I going to have a job in the future? Are there going to be any jobs left? Because it seems like the robots are taking over, and you know your artificial intelligence can do everything. I'm not needed, surplus to requirements. So this is very interesting. I gave a speech on this technology, blockchain, distributed ledger, AI, machine learning 3 years ago in Copenhagen City Hall. And a lady got up. The lady was a banker, and she said to me, "My God, you're about to put 20,000 people out of work." And I said, "No, I'm not actually. I'm going to give you the tools, and you can make that decision yourself." Yeah, I did pass the ball on there. But people fear technology in many ways when they shouldn't. And I really think it's two issues you've touched on there are really central to what I'm about to talk about. The first is this fear of political being moved to the fear of the technology world. And I think Vladimir Putin said it quite rightly. He who controls the best AI will control the world. Now, when Vladimir Putin says something like that, you should really, really listen, because if he means it, no doubt he's going to try and use it. At the same time, yeah. What is AI? So, I mean, I suppose let's listen. So there's two differing views on AI, and there's two different famous characters we know who've talked about it lately. One is Mark Zuckerberg, the other is Elon Musk. Now, I'll listen to Elon Musk because he knows how to land a rocket on a small piece of a platform out on the ocean. I probably won't listen to Mark Zuckerberg because he made one of the most narcissistic sites I've ever had to sort of join up to. But unfortunately, we all have to join up to Facebook sooner or later, don't we, if we want to keep in touch with Grandma. So that's that. But in terms of AI, should it be regulated? What is AI? It is code that we've programmed, people have programmed. So it comes from us initially. It does not come from itself. So indeed, I do not believe that artificial intelligence is artificial, because somebody needed to code it in the beginning. Now, what we do know about AI is that depending on the coder, it can make certain decisions about how you get insured, how you get loans. It is actually not very intelligent. It is very, how would you say, subjective about who it gives money to, or who it makes loans for, or who it makes decisions about. And it's got a long way to go. So don't fear it. Embrace it. It can help things. It can help things move quicker. Maybe you can get efficiencies. You can certainly get efficiencies. Where can you get efficiencies? Now, this is the interesting part. We talked about de-risking, know your customer, anti-money laundering, PEPs and sanctions. And the reason why many commercial banks have pulled out of certain countries, because if they fear the fines more than they would enjoy business. This is a crazy system. A crazy system where you can't do business in one country because of you fear the fine of the regulators because of they fear you might be doing business with somebody who is crooked. We have the technology. It exists today. It can be stopped. In fact, when we first built a crowdfunding demonstration platform based on distributed technology 2 years ago, the first things we incorporated were know your customer, anti-money laundering, PEPs and sanctions, and even something called adverse media. And today now I speak to people who want to have green funds. They want to invest in sub-Saharan Africa. But do you know what they want to do? They want to trace these investments right down to the solar panel, right down to the farm. And it's entirely possible to do today. And you have people this. We're actually going to tender on one. And all they want to do is the Green Investment Fund wants to see where their money's gone and to make sure the money is being used properly, that it is actually being distributed to the small and medium-sized enterprises in these countries. And all I want to do is actually help them imagine that and actually carry it out. Thanks.
What about this trade?
Trade and finance. Well, why do we do it? I mean, that's one thing Mihaela asked me about 2 years ago. Everyone's talking about technology and trade and finance. Well, I think it all goes back to our commercial, comparative advantage, of Adam Smith once said. What does our country own? What does our country have that is gives us a competitive advantage? And in many developing nations, you have minerals, resources that can be better managed. But this isn't done by trade and finance alone. You have to begin at the source point. So where do you start? You start at your mines, you start at your agriculture, you start with the small people on the ground, and you give them the tools that they need to benefit from their agriculture, from the mining.
Okay, Kit.
You mentioned one Russian, Putin. I'll mention another, Isaac Asimov, who came forward with some ethics and ideas about robotics many years ago, okay, which we actually should need to observe. I'm afraid I disagree with you on the idea that because we programmed to start it, okay, that we don't need to worry. We do need to worry about how we program it, okay, because there is a distinct possibility that a Putin left to it would not adopt Asimov's rules about robotics, and we could end up with artificial intelligence which is let to run to basically decide themselves whether or not they want to eliminate humans. Okay, that actually is a serious question about how we deal with those things, because artificial intelligence, it can provide some incredible solutions and will do and so forth in the future. But there are some dangers about what will happen if you let, essentially, you're letting the programs and so forth decide their own intelligence and so forth in the future. They can decide their own algorithms about how they deal with things. If we don't actually put some ethics and so forth into that, you can have some real problems for the future of humanity.
Yeah, can I just answer that? Yeah, I didn't mean to say that we shouldn't, but I think you're going to find it really hard once the AI war starts. And when we talk of Cold Wars, what we're looking at here is probably a new type of war. And this is the technology war. So how do you put global standards on AI? Do we have the same sort of treaties that we have for nuclear weapons? That's what you're going to need.
Any other comments? No? Then we move on to...
Hold on, I have one. You did talk about actually going back to trade.
Yeah.
If there is coffee in Uganda, right? There is coffee in Uganda, and His Excellency President always coming here, he's saying, how can I get my coffee, which is better than others in European Union, and how can I do this and that and the other? And you talk the wine. You're interested in wine. He's from France.
Among other things.
Among other things. So the provenance, never mind oil, Donald will deal with that. The issue of provenance is so important for the countries that we have. I mean, there is water in Lesotho. The water in Lesotho is better than any other water. So how does this digital landscape come about and transform the trade in something quite different than what it is before?
So what technology does for us really, and now we're going back to sort of problems in supply chain. And what we're using technology is to really put a digital discipline on the supply chain. Usually the farmers... so if we think about, there was a big scandal here in the UK, the horse meat scandal. Everyone thought they were eating a cow. In fact, they were eating their favourite racehorse from Aintree. took about 300 million off one company's share price in just a few hours. But what we're saying is actually, if that is my coffee, I want to protect my coffee. How can I do that? Coffee does not lie. Wine doesn't lie. Metal does not lie. It's the people along the supply chain that lie. So if we can have some sort of digital discipline that we can use through distributed ledger, AI, machine learning, we have a better supply chain. That makes it more efficient. That makes us able to actually cut down on the cost of trust. Now, it's the cost of trust that drives up the cost of business. So if we can reduce the cost of trust, we can reduce the cost of doing business for the very smallest person to the medium-sized person to the consumer. And this is where the middlemen don't particularly like it, because the middlemen make a lot of money out of saying, you need to pay me for that trust. I won't mention any credit cards. Everyone, shipping companies, if you think about it, your coffee, you've decided to move your coffee to Europe. You could you could sell and trade that coffee 3 times before it reaches that destination for a better price. This is what the future holds for you. You can get the best price for your coffee. Usually maybe the buyer of your coffee says to you, actually, I know the market really well, and you're only going to get this price. But how about if you had a smart contract with this buyer that said, if you actually get more for that coffee, we want some more as well. So you hook your future trade into their trade.
Okay. There's something there I wanted to get more clarity. For how do you explain you have used this word early morning, you have just used it again, the cost of trust. How do you explain this to an ordinary man like me and people in the village there?
Sure.
Thank you.
So I suppose that's very hard. I don't know how to explain this to someone in the village because I'm very much a city boy. But my problem is that I don't use cash very much anymore. But when I take out a note, maybe a £10 note, what is that? That's a promise from a central bank saying they're going to honor a debt. So that I have to trust the central bank there completely, right? So that's the beginnings of trust. But then when I start bringing in commercial banks, I have to start paying for extra services, such as credit cards. But every time I use a credit card, I'm paying for that card, the person who made it, the machine that's going to take it, the verification between that machine and the other machine that's going to take that transaction. So there's 6 middlemen probably in between me and a cup of coffee. And all I'm saying is this, probably 4 of them aren't needed at the moment.
Could you explain this trust business, how it comes about?
Well, trust comes about purely because of, as you said, many banks won't do business with some countries because they simply don't trust them. Okay.
If I am a part of a ledger, I'm a ledger.
But do you want me to specifically talk about technology and trust?
Yes. How does that technology brings in trust?
Well, if you can't break, so this is it. I've given Barry a nice bottle of wine that he's purchased from Alan in Paris. And I know that... Did you give it to him? Oh, that's nice of you then. But we know it's a good bottle of Burgundy. And Barry's passed it on to Amage here. But what he's done, he's kept it on the same ledger. We've kept it on a shared ledger. We can all access this ledger, but what I don't know is the price that Barry sold it to Amagif for. So Amagif's going to sell me, probably say like, you know what, this wine's really good stuff, Oliver. You should probably pay me $100, but I don't really know that Barry paid him 70. But what I do know is that wine is authentic, and it's very good wine, and I know the provenance of it. But should I know the business margins? No, perhaps not, because that's private. So that's where it comes into trade and finance. I can trust the source.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Shall I invite Alan, please?
Well,
Alan.
good afternoon. I'm somewhere in between the panel and the machine room of the engine room of CPTM, being involved in one of the inclusion initiatives. My words will be brief and to comment on a paradox that we are facing. Most of the problems and solutions that come in the way of economic and social transformation nowadays are global. It is about demography and urban concentration. It's about climate change. It's about digital transformation, about trade. these issues and the solutions relating to these issues are global. Now, the level at which people vote are the nations. And the nations are the place where national visions and national strategies are being developed. But they have to take into consideration what is happening globally and the solutions available globally. If you take demography, one aspect, of course, is food supply. Another one is urban concentration. Another one is infrastructure, water distribution, energy, etc. If you take climate change, it's about the impact on the climate, on the water supply, on agriculture, and energy supply. If you take the digital transformation, it's about adjusting to what is happening. It's not only fintech and insurtech, it's agrotech and edtech for education and civic tech for citizenship, etc. So all these digital technologies are pervasive and bringing new solutions that have to be accessible to all. And the fuel to this revolution is big data, which is to the 21st century what oil used to be in the last century. Big data is an energy that has to be fed into the various applications of digital tools. Now, what we try to do in CPTM, and I think this is where we have really an added value, is bridging the development of national visions and strategies to what is happening globally. And an example that I know well is the issue of international standards, because this is a toolbox for solutions. And increasingly, these standards are not only technical, but they are also dealing with management issues, with societal issues. An example being the ISO 26000 on social responsibility, for instance, or some standards which have been published recently on anti-bribery or governance of organizations. And this is a toolbox, one of the toolbox that we can help to be used at the national level. So the paradox is problems and solutions are global, visions are national. How do we bridge the two? And this is, I think, the added value of CPTM that we should nurture.
Thank you. Comments? Questions? Yes.
I'm simply reminding Alan or each of them that there were some things that made us very preoccupied in the Smart Partnership movement, not the hub, with standards. We always were, because it was connected with chemists and technology and so on. But in the last 7 years or so, the standards became in each country a focal point as the central bank governors, more than any others, more than Science and Technology, National Council for Science and Technology. And you wonder why. And we were very lucky, but it happened because of the fact that standards became a strategic, one of the strategic foci in a country, operative strategic foci, beyond technical. When we tried many times, as you know, we have a lot of leaders with us all the time. And you try to tell them, look, here is a chief executive of the Bureau of Standards in Uganda. And we tell President Museveni, and he said, oh, send him to the permanent secretary. He's technical. Send them to the they are technical people. They are looked at standards as technical things. But in fact, in the last few years, standards are no more just technical requirements in a country. They are strategic focal stimulus hubs of this kind of things we are talking about. And President Museveni, in fact, now made the chief executive, Ben Munyanga, part and parcel of the National Smart Partnership Hub and National Vision. It didn't happen before, but it is because of Alan who continued to remind us that it is not only, I'm not trying to say how clever is Alan, but Alan was an International Standard Organization Secretary General, and he's seen the development of the strategic role of National Bureau of Standards within each and every country in the developing countries becoming much more relevant than what the governments realize. Yeah. So,
Well, just
I mean, that's something
to
that.
comment on that, I think international standards have evolved in these new areas. Now, national standards bodies have not necessarily adjusted to this
That's it.
evolution. And this is an area where we can help them to adjust, because some of them are still very much on the technology and technical standards and not so much on organizational and management standards.
Can I ask one? How do you relate to standards?
And digital,
The implication on standards, this new digital landscape.
the blockchain.
Well, currently, 15% of the standards published by ISO relate to information technologies. And it's about 1,000 standards per year, and 15% of that relate to information technologies. All the buzzwords that we are talking about, big data, blockchain, are the subject of current developments in ISO or even published standards. So because these technologies have to rely on interoperability, on security, and on user friendliness in order to reach global markets. So you need international standards as tools to support the deployment of these technologies. So examples abound, and I have given to CPTM in the course of the past year. All the buzzwords that we have been addressing are subject of work in ISO or ITU, for that matter.
Just one little bit, Omar, because this is quite relevant. The ISO is formed of majority of developing countries Bureau of Standards, that they are associate members or otherwise. There are 140 something or whatever it is out of.
ISO has 164 member countries.
And majority of them, 140 something,
From
are
developing
from
countries.
developing countries. Now, they are most of them standards followers rather than standards makers. Now, this idea of smart partnership and engagement within real economic and other things that are finance processes in the countries made them capable to actually be invited to be part of making standards like the blockchain technology. There was only about a year ago when the chief executive of Australia, Dr. Brownie, addressed the central bank governors who were here and told them before ISO was deciding to have or not to have a committee to develop a new blockchain technology standard, address them to say, bring your own Bureau of Standards in Tanzania, Uganda, and so on, near the banks, because you will need them, because they need to explain to you this new blockchain standards that is developing. So there is a kind of participation of the Bureau of Standards in developing countries. Yeah? So sorry, it's very, very important. Let's go on because there will be other
I
other
just
things.
want to add that this is part of the regulation that we talked about earlier. Standards come in for the regulation, not the control. Just one quick comment.
I mean, it's not so much a comment, it's a question that I would like to ask you, on the previous. How do you link this kind of, let's say, strategy or CPTM with implementation? One, because it's missing in these links here, the data, it's missing the platform, it's missing the analytical aspect. This is something I'm doing with Europe at the moment on create economy and develop jobs. The idea is how you link the program, the strategy, with the real development of the projects on implementation side. As data is not there, analytics is not there, platform is not there, and we are trying to recover with data using satellite data, because these are there for 15 years, where you can implement, really develop a strategy and implementation at the same time. So okay, that's it, the observation.
Quick respond, Alan?
Well, it's precisely what we try to encourage, is developing national visions with strategic
tomorrow, the operative part, that's a think tanking mode. That's a signal that you mentioned.
Thank you. We move on to Donald, please.
Thank you, Omar. I'm speaking here as an ex-oil and gas man. In fact, I'll be an oil and gas man till the day I die. It'll be on my gravestone. I was Shell. I retired about 14 years ago, and since then I've been involved in academic work in the United States, Europe, South America, and the Philippines, in relation to the topic that fascinated me in my later years as a senior executive, which was the impact of the extractive industries, oil or gas or minerals, upon the host economies and the host nations. So what I'm leading up to here is a subject I feel passionate about, which is the issue of regulation. Because unless there is a decent regulatory authority within the country, then the extractive industries are going to spell disaster. We've all heard the story of the resource curse, and we know of countries where that is the case, where they have got significant mineral and other wealth, but they become disasters in the process. We've also seen successes, massive successes, and Omar here, I think, is representing one of the nations that is probably the gold standard in relation to that, in using natural resources to kick off their economy and to sustain it. Again, technology doesn't just mean nuts and bolts. Technology means procedures, it means administrative structures, the ability to manage. And the starting point, I think, is the fiscal and the licensing regime that is put in place. The type of contract that the government lets to somebody to carry out exploration and development in their country. There are various models for that. There's the classic royalty and tax situation, or is the production sharing or the contracting models. They're all there, and every one of them can be made to work. But rather more difficult is the decision in relation to income allocation. What are you going to do with the money that actually comes in? That in itself can be a curse or a benefit. Remember, you're not sure how much you're going to get, because whether you're talking oil or gas or minerals, you cannot predict what the price is going to be in the future. They're probably the most volatile commodities you can imagine. So planning ahead becomes very difficult. What is the base price you can assume in order to help your budgeting in the future, and how are you going to account for fluctuations in the future? But the allocation between parts of your nation and within your budgets is important. It becomes particularly difficult in nations which are worked out on something like a federal basis, and the decision as to who gets what, how much goes to central government, how much goes to the producing area, how much goes to the other parts of the country. That's not just a problem in developing countries. Places like Canada, for example, have significant problems still in this area with, for example, major oil and gas development in Alberta, yielding huge revenues for Quebec, without which Quebec probably would not be able to even talk about independence. Perhaps it's not later. It's variable, but on top of that, there's the social and political impact of it. Yeah? The fact that once you start bringing in this new industry with lots of perhaps expatriate workers for a certain time, you're going to change the society. You're going to boom town effects. You're going to have problems with sexually transmitted diseases. You're going to have problems with drug abuse. You're going to have problems with local inflation. All major problems if you don't foresee them and do something about them at the beginning. And the potential there all the time for conflict. The classic example of that is what's happened in Iran with the Iranian revolutions in 1951, 1979, triggered by the insensitivity of the foreign communities moving into Iran and evoking very considerable resentment, and the ability of the Iranian government, or the inability rather, to control that in those days. And we're still stuck with that problem here. So what we're getting down to here is the question of, do you have a regulatory authority that understands all these things as well as understanding the technology? Now, the technology, we're talking about the extractive industries, it's subsurface, it's earth sciences, what is below the ground. It's geology, it's seismology, it's quite a number of other very mathematically oriented technologies below ground, and engineering disciplines above it. Having said that, today
90% of the development we see is mature technology. It's available right now. It doesn't need the very large multinationals who are the only ones who have the technology to do that. You're practically able to go to the yellow pages in some countries and pick out the specialists who can do certain things for you. And provided you can get the financial backing for it, a group of us here today, probably, if we got the financial backing together, we could probably do a significant conventional development somewhere without any difficulty at all, contracting in the necessary resources. The other 5 to 10% represents the real frontier stuff, the deep water, the hostile areas, etc. And this is where the technology comes into play. But again, for the time being, it's probably only the top 100%, top 10%. So it's easy to get involved if you can access to the cash. And the disadvantage there is that all sorts of nefarious and suspicious groups can come in. We have seen in the past, that moving into certain countries, there has been Russian money coming in from mysterious sources. There have been people who have associated with gun running, associated with drug money, etc., setting up these sort of consortiums, able to bribe themselves into get development concessions and to move ahead. So again, your regulatory authority has got to be able to understand all that. A major problem that I have seen over the years in the country where I've operated is that the quality of the regulatory authority has been absolutely abysmal. Very low caliber people indeed. And the problem is that the best people will not go to work for the government. The best people will not be paid at the level within the civil service which they can command if they're to move into private industry. I remember myself very often when I was in the expansion mode for in certain countries, when we advertised for staff, we advertised for new people. Invariably, a significant number of the applicants were going to be from the regulatory authority, who were going to move out and earn a significant higher salary if they came to work for us. So there's a problem there straight off for countries to decide how well are we going to pay our regulatory authorities? Are we going to pay for quality, yes or no? If you don't get the quality, then you're going to be a big weakness. Final point I'd like to make here is that gets back again to the point that was made earlier today about the employment opportunities coming out of technologically based industry. It doesn't employ a lot of people. The small grocery store in the corner employs more people per $1,000 invested than does a major oil and gas development. So don't be fooled in relation to the amount of employment involved. The peak employment is going to come in the development phase, and a lot of that employment is going to come not in your country, not in Britain, not in the United States. It's probably going to be in Korea, where they will be building these major facilities which can be shipped in and towed halfway across the world. So once you get down into the operational phase, the numbers are not large, but the revenues are going to be vast. And unless you understand how that industry operates in all its forms, unless you've got the people in your regulatory authority who are as good and better than the people who will be involved in the oil companies, then you're not going to get the maximum benefit from it. A final point I leave with you is the fact that the revenues can be absolutely vast. Nigeria, unfortunately, we were talking about washing dirty linen in public earlier. Well, Nigeria's dirty linen is the fact that they had a regime in place where they could take 92 cents out of every dollar produced by an oil company. So they were getting 92% of the revenues were flowing to them from every dollar that was produced. Put that against the context that when President Obasanjo, probably the best president Nigeria ever had, just before he retired in 2004, 2005, he ordered an audit to be done to find out how much money had disappeared from the Nigerian treasury since independence in 1960. It came up with a figure which, as far as I remember, was the region of $500 billion had disappeared without trace over that period. And taking into account inflation, real value of money, etc., it was the equivalent of 6 Marshall Plans had disappeared in that time. One Marshall Plan was enough to set up Europe after World War II. 6 disappeared into thin air in Nigeria. That's the consequence if you don't get it right and if you don't have the regulatory systems in place.
No, but you are supposed to talk about about blockchain and how to deal with that.
More than 6 minutes now.
You probably want to raise that.
Can you please localize some of what you said to the hydrocarbons of Eastern Mediterranean?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch you.
Eastern Mediterranean hydrocarbons, the ones that are near Cyprus and Israel and Egypt. Can you localize some of what you said, the effect and the
Can you
consequences?
contextualize?
Okay, you're talking about the offshore development potential
Yes,
between Cyprus, Lebanon, etc., etc. Yeah, Egypt. Yeah. Again, I think unless you're prepared to sit down with the Egyptians, with the Israelis, with the Lebanese, to talk about these issues, to sort out what are your lines of demarcation, etc., what are your boundaries, then you potentially could be in big problems. If you have got the problem of oil or gas fields that extend over a boundary, that is technically not a difficult thing to sort out. It's called unitization. It's a process that has been handled, started in the United States back over 100 years ago. Yeah, but you have got to come to agreement between the various companies based on technical interpretation. How much is on one side, how much is on the other. A classic example of this is the Groningen gas field in the Netherlands, the biggest onshore gas field in Western Europe. Yeah, 80% of it exists in the Netherlands. About 20% is over the border in Germany. There is no production in Germany. The production is purely in the Netherlands, but there's an agreement between the two countries as to how proportion of the total will be allocated to Germany. So it can be sorted out, but there's got to be goodwill there, and it's got to be based upon good mathematical simulation, understanding, and arbitration by independent experts.
In other words, it requires smart partnership.
Absolutely.
Any other comment? Yes, please.
John, can I ask you a question?
Very good.
There was some really good figures there actually on Nigeria. You mentioned standards and regulations. I would say, how long did the audit take, and why did it take so long?
Well, I suppose there are the introduction of the blockchain technology in doing that.
The data in near real time.
Yeah.
And this is the potential. Sorry, I don't need to.
No, please.
So I suppose the possibility here is actually to manage your resources much better. You say the resource curse. It seems to me the resource curse was there, that they just completely lost control of their resources. And
I don't think they lost control of it. I think certain people within the country took control of the resources. And quite a number of people, feathered their own nests for 40 years. And until they got a really honest president in Obasanjo, then I don't think anybody tried to get a grip on it. And I'm not sure how well a grip they've got ever since. But yes, a lot of people took control, no doubt. Yeah.
Thank you.
But Omar, just to say why Donald in particularly, we asked him to signal this. Because Guyana, the vice president of Guyana, was very, very keen to understand, because Guyana with Exxon, do you want to say, yeah? Yeah, they are on the point to kind of undertake to develop a strategy which try to avoid as far as possible now, as different from whenever it was, when there are available blockchain technology and all that, which give transparency and probably help a little bit some of these problems. So we were asked to try to see if we can have a think tank in here with high commissioners to start with of those countries who have got already, like Uganda, like Namibia, like Mozambique. No, but Guyana is requesting that right now. Please, why don't you say right now something? Yeah. Is it on? Yeah.
Yeah, with Guyana is that they have huge offshore oil fields. And they've had a lot of trouble since then. Venezuela has revived a historic claim. They're now claiming half of Guyana. Not only does Guyana have oil, but they have gold, diamonds, rare earth, everything in the interior. Now that claim has gone back, 200 years. It was finally settled in the late 1890s by an American president, but Guyana has persisted. At the moment, there's an international legal team headed by Sonny Ramphal, former Commonwealth Secretary General, and it'll all go to The Hague. But what's going to happen? Guyana is a small country, is a big country with a small population, and if it's not the Venezuelans, I'm afraid the big oil companies will also clean them out as well. So the future for them, in terms of managing that oil field, is very difficult. Managing their newfound wealth is almost impossible.
Okay, I think we need to move on. And that's one point that Donald was talking about the job that needs to be done. You don't have to do that all in-house, because that was about job outsourcing. When I mentioned about the lecture I heard, that was what was called job Bangalore. In other words, many of the job that needs to be done can actually be outsourced. Can we move on now to Pete?
I'm not quite agnostic, but I'm sort of split over the future of technology, part of the questions that we were struggling with, and particularly around the trust framework. If I go back to sorry, I'm Pete Sweetnam. I'm the Director of Financial Inclusion for a company called Object Tech that deals in self-sovereign identity. Excuse me. If you look back 23 odd years, I was in northern Nigeria. My daughter was born, I rang my wife up and I had to book a telephone call in the exchange, and I had to take the call with the phone sat on the thing in complete public thing. And so there I'm blabbing down the phone, and everybody who's waiting for their call is just watching this Mzungu make an idiot of himself. Then Skype came in, and the entire quality of the conversation and process that I can have with my family changes completely. I can sit there and I can talk about the colour my wife wants to paint a wall without having to grab a phone call. So there are enormous benefits as technology moves on. I mean, they're fairly frivolous. But what has changed now is this interconnected nature of it, the web nature, and how then we trust each other around that place. And that is what the blockchain can give. It has many uses. For me, I understand a bit about how the blockchain works and the fundamentals behind it, the same way I understand the fundamentals of how my laptop works. But I don't need to know more than that. I'm interested in the use of the technology, not the technology itself. And up until now, I think a lot of what has happened has been led by the technologists, the people who look at what we could do with things. So I'm reminded there of a recent involvement, I think, in Hyperledger, which is the IBM-run blockchain, where some of the programmers there in public were saying, well, we could remove the immutability of the blockchain. Well, yes, you can, but then that defeats the entire object of the blockchain itself. Now, I think... What do you think is a blockchain? What do I think is... Oh, Lord, what is a blockchain? A blockchain... it is a distributed number of computers, systems, which are called nodes, which link to each other. If you put a bit of data onto a blockchain, once it is agreed, I think, by more than 51% of the nodes, the computer in the system, it is there and it cannot be removed. That's why it's called a ledger. You can't take things out of a ledger. No, it can't be. You can only, if I say I give you £5 on the ledger, if we decide actually that shouldn't have happened, we can't cross it out We have to put something else on the ledger which says, you give me £5 to make that a zero sum. That's my understanding, and that's as far as I really need to go with it. So we're moving now, I think, into systems where we're looking much more at the use rather than the technological potential. And there will be uses out there none of us have yet conceived of, or haven't been conceived of by anybody at all. Oh, sorry, I've just lost my thread completely. But the fundamentals is that it is around trust, and trust builds up largely over time. I trust you with I'll lend you £5, I get £5 back. Next time I'll lend you £50 because I'm beginning to build up a trust. And then that interaction creates trust, which is, I think, whether you're talking down at the village level or you're talking about resources, you are beginning to build a trust where, if it's immutable, you can't argue with it. So if you want to look at the interaction at state level, whether it's in the new oil fields in the Eastern Mediterranean, or whether in fact it's dealing with the current spat in Tanzania between, I can't remember the company, but the diamond miners and Tanzania over who's done what, what's gone where. Those individual diamonds, those individual assets can be tracked, as Oliver says, in real time. You know where they're worth, you'll know what they're worth. We have an agreement about how much money comes to an exchequer over that, and that can be transferred in. There is very little argument. It's not to say that people won't find at some point a way of wrecking that, but largely at the moment, that is where it stands. You can take the same as the coffee producer or a co-op of coffee producers. I've worked with co-ops before. Wherever they are, there is a big trust issue very often with them. Were the beans in the fields in Lincolnshire sold for this amount, or were they sold for something slightly different? And how does that... Sorry? Yeah, okay. But, you know, it doesn't matter what it is. It can be the diamonds there, it can be a coffee co-op in Eastern Tanzania or Uganda or whatever, where the members of that co-op can actually see those transactions. They are permissioned to see those transactions. That engenders trust, which possibly didn't sit there before. The same thing about diamonds, the same thing about oil. So I think that the blockchain, this whole way of making immutable trust, is the future. That means we can begin to eliminate an awful lot of the middlemen. That means the cost of access to a market through a technology comes screaming down. That means middlemen come out of the process. That means more money potentially goes to the original producers, potentially. It also means, I think, that we can bypass the national visions, that there will be localized processes which don't work to a nationally agreed strategy and nationally agreed process, which means, going back to the political, that power is beginning to come back into the hands. This is where I become a bit worried, because the internet gives us access to almost the entire sum of human knowledge. And what do we do with it? We look at pictures of cats and we're rude to people we don't know. I don't know why cats, I'd rather it was dogs. But, you know, facetiousness apart, there is an issue about how power flows down, how we begin to listen to other views. So Trump, for example, keeps screaming at people about this, that and other, and most of us go, that's rubbish, or I do at least, don't predict anybody else. But it speaks to his constituency. Despite this potential, there is very little exchange of ideas and very little exchange of real movement in the political sphere. That's the bit that gives me worry. It's that human connection, which isn't where I wanted to stay, but I think that's my time, is it?
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you very much. Any quick comments?
identity, because besides blockchain and all that stuff, maybe we can take home also the issue of identity.
Okay. I mean, at the moment, okay, so just to be clear, Object Tech works in identity. We have an agreement with the government of Dubai to provide paperless passports and gateless immigration into Dubai. The data on your passport can be 10 years old or 9 years, 3 months old when you travel anywhere. It's largely out of date. It can be subverted fairly easily, as we know, with fraud and so on. So an identity which belongs to you, which is our premise, it doesn't belong to anybody else, becomes a transportable thing which you can use wherever and however. You can use it to get into Dubai, which will be one of the first uses. You can use it then maybe for part of the KYC AML processes of getting a loan or getting a bank account. You can give an identity to anything, so a company can have an identity which can then maybe begin to engender a certain amount of trust around. What do you do? Sorry? And yes, I presume I hadn't really thought of that large, but a country, but also assets can have an identity, or you can tie assets to an individual and so on. We use the blockchain very lightly, just for validation and verification of the process.
So it looks like that in the new environment, digital or otherwise, trust is the key. Is that correct?
Oliver will explain. Let Oliver.
Just to put this into perspective, we signed a deal with Stena Steel on the day that Code Steel lost 40% of its share price.
Falsifying data on the steel supply chain. That's the cost of trust.
Okay, so trust now becomes a very, very important issue. The question is human being in general increasing their trustworthiness? For example, that's the big question, because trust is about values, it's about purpose, and I just learned a new word. It's about emotional integrity. I'm not quite sure what that means, but that is required, and I'm just questioning whether the human race has increased their trustworthiness. From what I see around, that is debatable. Anyway, let's move on to the next one, because we have gone beyond time. Okay. All right.
Slightly apologise. Rather than 5'6", I'm 6'6". So we heard this morning quite a lot about megatrends and the physical, biological, and digital. I mean, from my perspective, digital innovation is changing the consumer-supplier relationship. And when I talk about digital innovation, I talk about a mix of technologies. So we're not just talking about blockchain, we're talking about a broader set, which I would include AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, which is a subset of artificial intelligence, and data analytics. What is key across all these three areas, or these four areas of digital innovation, is coming back to the point just made, that value, trust, and risk is all changing as these technologies are brought in. If we take shared ledger, I mean, people have mentioned about trust and trust changing. I mean, from my perspective, trust is moving from centralized. So, with a lot of financial services, trust was with the central banks, the common banks, and it's moving out to be distributed. So it's the trust between Alan, Donald, and about that bottle of wine. So the trust model is moving. What we're also seeing, though, is there's a lot of intermediaries entering the market. Mihaela mentioned fintech today. or earlier today. So this is a mix of financial technology, and this is technology companies entering the new marketplace, providing new solutions, or there's a company called Ripple out there. They're also providing financial services themselves. So fintech is a mix of new financial services and new technologies. Much of the technology is not new, though. We've had shared ledgers, probably in the UK from the original Lloyd's marketplace. But it's as Pete, the coffee house, yes, the coffee houses. But as Pete said, it's the application of the technology and the use, the speed, the fact it's ubiquitous, it's open. So anyone who has access, whether that's mobile phones, can use this technology. And that's, to me, a key point, that it is access that is key, and access across the communities. People have access to receive information or data, but also they have the ability to log data. So data is then stored by Google. Sorry, is that my 3 minutes?
Yeah, quickly, just one last.
Right. Okay. So I suppose my key point is coming back to the point we made earlier, and to me, we need a framework for adaptable innovation. And what I'd like to see, and it's part of the research I'm working on with one of the universities in the UK, is to create that framework. And when I talk about a framework, I talk from being an engineer. So it's a mix of risk, standards, regulation, architectural governance, it's control. And it's something that is actually practical, not just a term. So I would like to see it adaptable framework being something that is actually solid rather than ethereal. Pardon?
Yeah, the framework in relation with economics.
Correct, socio-economics, yeah.
We have another two panelists to innovation. So let's move on to Patsy, please.
I've spent nearly 30 years in the Commonwealth Secretariat, and I agree with him, but the thing which resonated with me today is when he spoke of the new ruthlessness towards developing countries. And they're not only the small island states which are facing existential threats because of global warming and sea level rise. I think it's Tuvalu, which is now actively looking for a place to go to, a country to go to, when they have to decamp. And it was the president of the Maldives who many years ago told the Commonwealth that he knew lots of the island, it's a huge chain, would be sinking under the sea. So the Commonwealth has always been interested in that. That is a very serious matter. And it's something that I don't think the threat to small countries is being taken seriously by the big developing countries. Amitav again spoke of the new ruthlessness towards developing countries. We see this in the Brexit negotiations. I also chair an organization called the Ramphal Institute, and we are desperately trying to bring to the notice of Commonwealth governments, not all of them, the developing ones, a lot of the thinking, which thank God Michaela is doing, the thinking about development issues, right into the heart. We write to prime ministers, we send them our reports. we're working very closely with the ACP countries in Brussels. And the negotiations. Yeah, do go in. The negotiations which these countries will now have to do with Britain once it exits the EU will be reminiscent of the negotiations which they had to undertake when Britain abandoned, I should say, the Commonwealth and joined the EU. And I have experience of that because Sonny Ramphal, again, was very much involved in all those negotiations, Cotonou and what's the other one, Amateur? Lomé. And I remember asking him, and they went on for years, how is it going? How's the EU? He said, they're absolutely merciless towards us. And Britain is going to be merciless towards the small countries. Britain has made it quite clear that it is interested in the big ones, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, India, South Africa, perhaps Nigeria. And so, no, after the breakup. But they're not, they want to do trade with these big countries. But they're not worried about what happens to, at the moment, the smaller countries. The other thing that that I would like to raise is the whole business of the de-skilling, the banks leaving the Caribbean, but they're not leaving, who mentioned it? One of you gentlemen. They're not leaving the money laundering countries. They're not leaving Cayman and the Turks and Caicos, which are all British colonies still. They're not leaving Gibraltar. They're keeping their money there, but they're moving out of Jamaica, Barbados. We are not in the money laundering business. Antigua, they're moving out. Which is just, they've been there for over 100 years. And suddenly, for some reason. There's a whole lot of problems which small countries will have to face. And then there's the question of migration. Britain, which has been the haven for students, for education, for especially, again, developing countries, getting a visa now is almost impossible. Even Nigerian businessmen, and Britain wants to do business with Nigeria, find it impossible, and it is very costly. And if you want a visa, say in Jamaica, to come to Britain, your passport now goes to Washington, because they don't want to have the staff there. How much it would cost them? A couple of £100 a month to keep a good visa. So, there are all these problems. And that's what we are working on, to bring to all developing countries. We keep in very great touch with African countries, that they have to now begin thinking very seriously of what they have to do to face the future. And finally, I'd like to raise with all these tech men here, and I pride myself on being a dinosaur. I refuse to learn. However, this business of OSI, does anybody know about outside source intelligence, terrorism, a lot of commoners? I for my sins, have a little perch at King's College London, and King's is always in spying and that kind of thing, security. And several small countries, including Trinidad and Tobago, have now asked them, please develop courses so we can learn to use the internet. Maybe I should tell them about you, sir. Because apparently they'll never be able to have spies. Nobody's going to tell them that, you have a big threat among certain members of your population. As a matter of fact, Trinidad now has, per capita, has the highest proportion of young men going to join ISIS, not ISIS, the bad fellows out there in the Middle East, which is surprising to everybody. America has warned them, but America is not going to help them to find out anything. So apparently, and I'd love to hear some comment on this, if you know how to surf the internet, you can find out a lot from conferences, from reports, etc., etc. So you have an idea of the dangers of extremism. And on a final note, somebody mentioned money laundering. Most money laundered money comes into the big banks in Britain and North America. And, sir, whoever said it, I had the rare good fortune to see the current account of the wife of a Nigerian president. I know the name of the bank, and I know it's in Mayfair. £8 million, current account. Okay? The money. And remember when President Buhari was here, when Mr. Cameron told the Queen that he's invited two of the most corrupt leaders in the world, and that included President Buhari. The following day, President Buhari was at a meeting, and they said to him, when you go to talk to Mr. Cameron at this conference, what will you say to him? He said, I'll just say to him, I want my money back. So.
Thank you. Any quick comments? No comments?
Of course, there will be comments.
Sorry, just quick, just on what you.
Oliver.
I think it's very interesting what you said there about young men
going out to fight for these sort of very bad people in the Middle East. I live in Sweden, which is meant to be one of the happiest countries on earth. Gothenburg is the second biggest recruiting ground in Europe, so I don't know how to stop that kind of thing, but it seems to me... Yeah, we know we've got a problem. Yeah, I suppose it's monitoring. Yeah.
It was in the morning, you were here, Oliver. There was the head of the Cybersecurity Institute, the first one in developing countries in Malaysia, was online.
Yes.
And one of the things that he told everybody was what Patsy was alluding to, that besides one or two other tactical kind of modes of defense, the multi-distributed security networks, human networks, is one that is being enabled by blockchain and other things. And that is something that probably should be discussed more about it. This is not spying in the old, because the word of spying, the word spying does not help. It's a different language nowadays. Because what are you spying? There is nothing private. So what are you spying?
I think that you kind of go back to what Pete was saying about
Please.
self-sovereign identity there.
Yeah.
The only way really to stop identity theft or people compromising your identity
Is to own your own identity. If you think about what we own at the moment, I'm responsible for my tax forms. I'm responsible for telling my doctor if I got... So what's the big issue of giving over your complete identity to yourself and being responsible for it? I don't...
There is nobody there, and you don't want anybody to control, because then it's a big brother. So you are part of.
So most of the fake identities that are given out passports are actually done from a centralized system. It's usually somebody internally giving out the fake IDs and passports.
Patsy said.
Okay, can we move to the last but not least?
Okay, I'm Barry Faure. I'm a smart partner from Seychelles, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I'm very glad to be here. I'm a director on the board of the CPTM. I'd like to promote the CPTM because it is an organization.
I forgot to say that Seychelles is online also, live broadcasting.
Yes, it is an organization that helps, as Patsy said, in thinking for in particular for the developing countries. And each time I interact with the CPTM and the smart partners, I find that it brings a lot of benefit. Today, since yesterday, we've been meeting, and this time it has been about the digital landscape, the digital economy, and innovations in that context. I'm very happy to have listened to people like Oliver here, and Pete and Mike. I think we need more of the Olivers, basically, more of the Olivers in the world. Because the digital landscape is currently dominated by the Facebook, by Microsoft, by Google, and they tend to extract all the benefits of the data that we are actually producing on a day-to-day basis. The lessons that we learn from Oliver, Pete and Mike is that there is a different way of going about it. True, the data that we are producing is no longer private. There doesn't seem to be a need for spies. But there is, and hence we seem to be, as I read in an article from The Economist, we seem to be learned helpless. So the more we seem to have more knowledge, we're aware of what's happening, but we seem to be helpless to the fact that what we're producing is no longer private. But what you are saying is that there is an alternative. Regulation, we've heard from the ISO, how with the ISO there can be rules which are put in place which would be able to provide a regulatory framework that would be able to limit the control that the big five have on the digital landscape, whilst not necessarily killing the innovation that is required. Now, on innovation, I heard about adaptive innovation. Seychelles is a country that has always embraced innovation. Sometimes slower, sometimes faster. We now are connected to the, it's about 10 years now, I think, to the fiber optic cable, and that has brought a lot of value added to the country. We are working on having another connection to another fiber optic cable, which is important to provide redundancy. We heard from this morning from another smart partner who spoke about UK coming up with a report that talks about the need to develop the digital ecosystem. In small countries, we are also going in this direction. Throughout Africa, there is the fiber optic cable that has been set up that is connecting all our countries. Within our countries, we need to develop these networks so that we bring the benefits of the digital infrastructure to each and every village. We already have smartphones, all of us. Okay, the fisherman, the farmer has it, and they use it in fishing, they use it in farming. So we are using this even in Seychelles, although there are disadvantages. I was on an aircraft on the 10th of October, flying to Dubai, and suddenly my phone crashed. I was accessing WhatsApp through the Wi-Fi system of Emirates Airlines, and suddenly the phone froze. We tried to unblock it in Goa, didn't manage. It was sent to Mumbai. They managed to do something about it. Thankfully, because of Google, I managed to retrieve about 80% of the data that I had, which was in the cloud, in Google Cloud. So we are making use of it, of innovation and of the digital economy. Seychelles, I was saying, is a country that positions itself as an innovative country. We are leading on the blue economy front, for instance. We champion the blue economy and on climate change as well. Tomorrow there will be the COP23 in Bonn. Seychelles will be one of the 3 key speakers at the opening of the COP23. And again, we'll be talking about the blue economy, the innovation that we've been doing in financing, for instance, the Blue Bonds initiative, the conversion of our debt to conservation, where we'll be using the benefits of the debt that would have been converted to mapping the extensive EEZ that we have, which also poses a problem. In fact, we are a small country, but we have a large ocean, 1.4 million square kilometers. How do you monitor? How do you survey this EZ when you have currently a lot of crimes, illegal activities that are happening out there at sea, be it piracy, be it narco trafficking, human trafficking, the illegal exchange of small arms from Yemen going towards Somalia. And you heard recently in Somalia on the 14th of October, there was a huge explosion, the biggest that had happened in the last 20 years or so, killing over 300 persons. So there is a need for us to use the innovation, the digital landscape, for us to monitor what is happening out there in our extensive ocean, for which we have the sovereignty, but we may not necessarily have all the tools for us to be able to manage it. Now, luckily, we've been working with partners, with the multinationals, international partners, with our neighbors, for us to put in place systems and organizations which would enable us to develop the networks which are required for us to properly monitor. I think my time is up. So just to conclude, innovation is important, but it has to be, we have to look for ways how to bring it closer to our communities, to our governments, develop their capabilities, and the ability to transform these capabilities for the benefit of the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Honorable Hosiko.
Yes, for the last words. Yeah, and then we close.
Yes, from Namibia. Thank you very much, Omar. Thank you very much. I'm just making a few comments. Starting with former President Buhari, what was the answer to "that is I want my money"? I was expecting to get the answer from the host. Thank you very much. We have listened very interesting speeches, statements, and signals from experts. Now, my comment is based on what the ordinary smart partner will make out of the presentations of the experts in relation to our people back home and in relation to the concept smart partnership, sharing what you have, including information. And Michaela, I'm happy that you have provided this CTM way of getting there, adaptive networks. I don't know whether Dr. Michaela have made every time we come here an explanation on these things that are hanging around here, this ball there and this. That is adaptive networking. The information we are sharing today, I am happy, have been shared by many of our hubs in different countries. And it is important that all countries who have shown interest in these activities or who are members of the Commonwealth are enabled to share these discussions. Now, back home, we have what is called small hubs or country hubs. And to avoid our people to use or to wrongly use internet, and the growth, expansive growth of information technology. We need to use that. It is a reality, it is real. It is real that this thing have come and is coming and is growing. And as it grows, it have got negative and positive impact on our communities. And therefore the hub should take responsibilities in different countries, should take responsibility to network and emphasize the positive side of information technology and stay away from the negative sides. So I wanted just to emphasize adaptive networking. And that is the responsibilities of country hubs, to make sure at least the discussions here filter down to our people in the different countries. This is very, very important. It's rare that you get this type of information, of sharing of information with grassroots people like me and big business people, directors and so on, who have managed Shell. I'm happy. I was thinking back home, I said, my partner there, my smart partner there, I don't know whether he knows how many filling stations are in Namibia. How many contributions are we making to Shell's income? But what's important really is that we see how all these things can be networking by our people in general, which are very, very important, which is to me very, very important. I want to conclude by saying, Michaela, thank you very much. Thank you very much that you have provided again with experts and that it is happening in some of our countries. They are watching what we are saying and what we are doing here, and that indeed the experts who could not come here to listen to the others will at least have an opportunity to pick up what the others are doing and to filter it down to our systems. Thank you very much.
You want to say something? No, you have the last word. Let me.
I wanted to make one signal, which is very short, is in one word. George, Chu? I think we're talking about how to, we are already connected. In fact, the signal for tomorrow is that we are over-connected. There is a hyper-connectivity, which is a major problem. And because of that, I'd like to give one book to from Deputy Prime Minister, which is called Over-Connected, Where to Draw the Line at Being Online. So we are in the library, and there are some points there to read.
Okay. Thank you very much. Just a short conclusion. From what I have heard this afternoon, reminds me of of something which I heard long time ago, which was that the future is not going to be what it used to be. Somebody told me that long time ago. We have heard about positive, negative developments from Amita, but with hope for the future. We've heard about new trends, which a lot of possibilities for the future. But the thing that came through out of all this is that there needs to be more trust. And that means we need more smart partnership, because trust is one of the 4 components of smart partnership, which is respect, trust, transparency, and tolerance. That is the heart of smart partnership. So whatever is happening, if we embrace smart partnership, then the future is not going to be me first, it is going to be we all first. So thank you very much for your contribution. We have The panel will continue tomorrow, but we are breaking up now so we can prepare the room. I told you you are going to have the last one.
Well, no, it's not the last, it's somewhere in between. No, Omar is a rolling panel. I must confess that the person who sorted out this dilemma about would the panel have only few, would everybody be part of panel, would the panel be ongoing, is Andrew Taussig. And I thank very much to Andrew because we were trying to see in what way there will be a rolling kind of situation, both in terms of people involved as well as the signals to continue. And one thing that has not been this morning touched on was more or less the issue of the impact of digital on democracy. And is it the same? I think Amitav did mention about that. At about 3:30, we are going to have another signal on democracy and from Carl Miller, who is very well known in relation to democracy and power and algorithms. And is not just an academic. He's actually involved real time. So that will be the only one other signal today after the formal annual general meeting. And tomorrow at 11 o'clock, you can be live on broadcasting or be here. There will be another signal which will come from Australia. And that will be a Club of Rome member, but who is preoccupied very much about digital landscape and environment, as any Club of Rome member does for so many years. So these themes, which have been somehow plugged in, are very much connected to the Commonwealth themes. But that's something that Omar probably later during the AGM will be identifying in his report. So you have about maximum 20 minutes to go down again. The brunch continues, sorry for the lunch, but there was a brunch, the after lunch, whatever it's called. But be back here in about 15 minutes because there is a formal AGM. So in addition to the live broadcasting rules, which we are not quite obeying, but that's the usual smart partnership mode, there is a company house rule now that at 2:30 sharp, the CPTM Limited, am I right, Kit, has to start. And there will be again live broadcasting with CPTM members from all over the Commonwealth. So we must be here. The company secretary will be here, so must be here and start. That will be very short, will be about maximum 1 hour, and then we'll get into the panel, and then the rest as it is in the program. Okay, so thank you very much. And actually the last word is from Lesotho, because I forgot about it.
Sorry,
you. Sorry,
Thank you very much, Mihaela, at long last.
Could you introduce yourself? Civil servant, permanent secretary.
My name is Lechu Setinane from Lesotho, a government official.
So he's permanent secretary, Ministry of
I'm a government official.
Prime Minister.
I'm sitting next to my friend here, who is a government official too. I have another one behind. It's my minister. It's
The
my
politician.
honorable minister, who is a diplomat. We are 4 in here. And I felt that beyond the listening, long listening I've been making, I should convey our appreciation to the debates in which we are growing. It has been very difficult. The difficult part of it is where we've been told that we should be not who we are. We should not look at ourselves as government officials, should look at ourselves as academic. That's very difficult. That's very difficult. When you look at the very haunting situation that is following us, ringing questions in our heads, which we are failing to answer appropriately. We are going back there to give answers to those questions that we are being asked. When is my child going to be, who graduated 10 years ago, when is he going to be employed? I have not eaten anything for 3 days. Can you help? We have not been able to give straight answers to those questions, yet we are here and we can not even talk about those problems. We, however, appreciate that we've been listening, and we're sure that at the end of this, we're going to have the answers that we can take back to the communities we come from. It is only when you understand the situation from which we come from that you will understand why sometimes we can become even a bit more impatient with the whole session, because there are questions unanswered. We would like to put in before the smart partners that Lesotho, poor as it is, has unexploited resources. Got a lot of water. We've got stones, because we live in a mountainous area. We've got stones which we have started selling out. So we are asking anybody who could be interested in that to come down to Lesotho and look at those resources, which are very rare, and find out if probably when we come to the allocation of money to our poor communities, we can be having 5 cents on top of 2 cents that we have now. We're trying to allocate, but it is very little that is allocated. Yes, we understand we have to manage our resources properly, but that also needs us to send the kids to the schools to be educated, to understand the management and the styles of management. Ladies and gentlemen, we feel that we, like I said, Mihaela, we are growing in this session, and we really appreciate what we have been listening to. Thank you very much.